Welcome to Inside College Admission, conversations with admission leaders about matters affecting the college going process. My name is Peter Van Buskirk, and I am joined today by Stephanie Niles, who is a Vice President for Enrollment Communications at Ohio Wesleyan University, and also an immediate past president of our national association, the National Association of College Admission Counselors. Welcome, Stephanie.
Thank you very much. It's good to be here.
Glad you can be with us. And then this is, I guess, normally a very exciting time on a college campus. You're kind of emerging from the wilderness of making decisions about whom to admit. I don't know, it's always a wilderness, but and then celebrating with those kids you've admitted. But then you've got the eager juniors on the horizon. Tell me, what are the feelings like on your campus right now in light of all of the health crisis that we're dealing?
Well, of course, like most campuses, no one is actually there. It is unfortunately sitting empty and quiet at the moment while our students, all but about 50 or so, are gone. And all of our individuals are working remotely, except for essential employees who are spending minimal time on campus. So certainly it's a very different feeling. Typically, we'd be welcoming dozens of visitors every day to campus, if not more. This weekend was to be the first of two major events for admitted students, where we'd have a couple hundred students and their families join us, and lots of faculty members, lots of current students, lots of staff members. The campus would be lively and active. And again, unfortunately, like most campuses, very different situation at this point in time. So we are certainly spending a lot of time like this on Zoom, in conference calls, and trying to create new and different virtual opportunities for students like my colleagues are around the country to keep them engaged, ensure they're getting the right information that they need to make informed decisions about the college they hope to attend next year.
Well, tell me a little bit about what your month of March was like, because I would imagine that given the open house on the calendar, two of them on the calendar, you had to be looking at it almost hour by hour. Are we going to keep it? Are we going to cancel it, et cetera? What kind of factors went into your thought process, and at what point did you make the call on those programs?
Yeah, that's a good question. So, of course, first it was making a decision about the campus itself and how do we continue to educate our students. And over the period of about a week, we went from a modest shutdown, if you will, a turn to remote learning for a short period of time, to a slightly more extended time period, to canceling the rest of the semester from a in-person perspective and moving completely to online learning. I think talking to colleagues around the country, there was a very similar process happening at that point in time, with everyone, of course, trying to preserve the semester if possible, but ultimately recognizing due to this global pandemic that was just not going to be possible. Similarly, we look to keep our office open as long as possible, obviously wanting to balance the ability to be able to welcome students to campus, but really being attentive to the safety and well-being of our employees. And so we closed to visitors on March 16th. We had made the decision to be remote as of the end of that week prior. March 16th was a Monday. And so we moved into high gear at that point in time to determine how do we take all that would have happened in the next few weeks. At that point in time, Ohio has a stay-at-home order in place actually just through Monday, though there's certainly indication that that will be extended and already has for K-12. They're not due back until at least May 1st. State employees are also required to work from home until at least that time period. So we expect further communication along that vein. So we are certainly planning at least through the month of April, if not longer, to continue to engage our visitors in a virtual way.
So as you do that, as you engage your visitors, both those students who are admitted trying to figure out, is Ohio Wesleyan going to be my home for 4 years, or the students who are just getting started? What are the biggest pandemic-related challenges that you face with the enrollment of the class of 2024? Let's think first about the seniors now. Kids
Sure. So, of course, cost, right? I mean, so many families not only are being impacted by the health crisis, but also by the financial realities that are accompanying the fact that so many people now are out of work, temporarily or permanently laid off. Their savings and investments have been impacted by the economic downturn and what's happening with the stock market. So we are seeing on multiple levels families who have in a wide variety of income situations really being impacted by this. And we are, I would say those conversations are just beginning. At Ohio Wesleyan, we've always entertained appeals, but they are coming in fast and furious at this point in time. And again, the range of individuals who are appealing and the reasons why is changing as well. They are looking to make even college a reality, not just let me compare one institution to another, but how do I make this a reality given the uncertainty right now this week, the uncertainty that we all know is extending through at least the next several months, and for individuals in certainly in particular industries, what may happen with those folks longer term as we look to recover eventually from this situation. So that's going to be a reality. We've done a couple of things. We did, first of all, change our deposit date to June 1 in recognition of giving families a little more time to understand their circumstances. Obviously, we also hope that we might be able to reopen before June 1st and welcome families to campus. I don't know if that's a reality, but that was certainly part of the consideration. We did drop our deposit to $200 from $400. Again, just a small way to acknowledge some of the considerations and concerns that families are having financially. For those who'd already paid the $400 deposit, we're crediting $200 of that to their account. The other $200 goes directly into a specific orientation-related costs. We also just announced yesterday a tuition freeze. And we will freeze at the 1920 rate as opposed to implementing the 3% tuition increase that we had intended across the board. So we were able to share for our current students some good news, as well as for our prospective students. That will be about a $1,400 benefit for each student. So those are certainly some immediate concerns that families are facing. The other is simply questions are already arising about the fall. You know, what about students who may wish to take a gap year? What about students whose families are not comfortable with them leaving, with all the uncertainties that we sit in at this point in time? So we, like other institutions, are having conversations about what does the fall look like if we can't welcome students back to campus. How will we manage that situation? Will we have online opportunities, remote opportunities? Would we extend or find a way to change the structure of the fall term so it could start later? All these are questions yet without answers, but ones that have to be asked. We have told, however, our international students that we will create an online experience for them for the fall if they are not able to get to campus. It certainly seems for those students that it will be likely that even if airlines are flying and borders are open, that the processing of visas will be delayed. And so we want to prepare for that eventuality.
Wow. I want to go back to the financial piece that you referenced, because as many families are starting to understand, the demonstration of need with regard to financial aid is based on not your most recent financial year, but the prior year before that. So families that might have looked like they were pretty comfortable in 2018 are looking at a very different reality in the last couple of weeks. Unless you're sitting on a Fort Knox sort of treasury, how can an institution deal with that? I guess there's a lot of creative problem solving that goes into helping families bridge the gap there.
Yeah, it's a good question. And each institution is going to answer it differently. It's going to come down to, for some, enrollment versus revenue. And that's going to be, it's an institutional priority decision. Do you bring in more students who will be paying less? Or do you bring in fewer students who will pay closer to the amount you had thought they would? Certainly we can entertain students' special circumstances requests, right? And that's, of course, a standard practice already in place for families who do have a very different circumstance currently than the one that was reflected in FAFSA data. But like you said, I think we will certainly see more of that. And it will be a question. I mean, and certainly it's not just an admission or enrollment question. It's a board level decision at each institution. What resources can and will we make available to families to deal with some of these challenges? And do we have the resources that that we can make available? Not every institution will be able to say that they do. So that's going to be a very different answer looking across the country at different campuses.
You know, and even before the coronavirus crisis, I think were growing concerns, if not apprehension, about what would happen on this cost issue relative to the Department of Justice and the DOJ's getting involved with the way colleges set deadlines and fees and that kind of thing. And now the Department of Justice is encouraging families to look at different offers to perhaps go beyond a May 1 traditional deadline or June 1 deadline. Um, do you sense that there's going to be more of an open bidding process going on, especially now with the pandemic? You've got families saying, hey, you know what, this happened to us. If we're ready to go to Ohio Wesleyan, but if you can't come up with something to help us out, we're going to shop to get the better deal.
Absolutely. I would expect that families will do that, which is why we have to be sure of our response, aware of our resources, and know what next steps we have the ability to take. Vice versa. I mean, certainly I have thought about the fact that there will be students who've chosen to go to college outside of Ohio, and those families are thinking, maybe having my child in Michigan or Florida or California or New York at this point in time is not where I'd like them to be. Let's look at what options they might have closer to home. And so we are starting to think about how can we make sure those families know we allow students within a 30-mile radius of the campus to commute. That might become a more attractive option for students. I've also told, I have a newly hired coordinator of transfer admission. She began with us in December. It's the first time we've had an individual dedicated to transfer admission exclusively. And I said to her, you might be the busiest person here over the next year or two, because we've all heard the idea of, again, students making decisions for personal reasons and financial reasons, perhaps to go to school closer to home or attend a community college, which then a year or two from now, that decision, they might be ready for a next step, different than they are now. So we are going to need to really think about how do we continue to welcome transfer students, be best prepared to ensure the transfer of credit, seamlessness of that process. So as I do see that those, there will be more of those students in that situation in the future.
Certainly a lot of moving parts, and historically, folks in your position, and I remember back in the days when I had a job similar to yours, we tried to model our outcomes as much as possible based on yield and other factors, and now everything that I would imagine you put into your models normally is not reliable, so you've got greater uncertainty. I think in one of our earlier correspondences you mentioned that you don't, Ohio Wesleyan typically has not operated a wait list, which some schools will use. Those who have the wait list right now will use that as sort of the insurance policy late in the summer if students don't materialize. How do you anticipate managing your enrollment right up to the start of school?
Sure, that's a good question, and you're right. Every model is pretty much out the window at this point in time. They're largely based on historical data and make some assumptions that students in this year will perform in similar ways, and that situation, the environment, will be similar to what we've seen in the past, whether it's 3 years or 5 years or more that you base those models on. And so we all know that this is very different. So we won't be able to rely on that, and that is the case. So Ohio Wesleyan has not maintained a wait list, and so that isn't a tool that we are able to use at this point in time. Other schools will certainly be in a position. I just was reading something yesterday that indicated that schools are already going to wait lists. April 1st is pretty early for that kind of activity to occur, and so I do worry about that. Again, with some of the relaxing of regulations in now because of the Department of Justice ruling, I think it's going, and then the pandemic on top of that, I think it is going to create quite a bidding war over the coming months. And students may be differently even interested in waiting longer to make a decision. One, because some institutions, I know 300 plus at least like us, have moved to a June 1 deadline, but even without that, they may choose to, partially because they have to, take that time to figure out what is their financial reality, what are the best opportunities and offers that come their way, how indeed can their family make this work. So we are, interestingly, we are sitting ahead of any of the last 4 years in terms of deposits at this point in time. Now, will that hold? I don't know, but we are certainly doing everything we can to let students know that we're ready for them. We will be prepared for their either arrival on campus or their remote online learning experience. But we are trying to continually communicate with them to let them know that they are first and foremost in our thoughts and our actions, and that they will have the tremendous opportunities that they could have experienced before at Ohio Wesleyan yet again in the coming years.
That's the best you can do. That's the
That's
best.
right. That's
Now,
right.
let's kind of look at the kids who've been admitted. Um, and there's got to be a lot of excitement, a lot of anticipation in those young people, because they're at the end. The finish line is in sight, and the same for you. As you're looking at the class of 2024, they want to come see the campus again. They want to talk to your professors, your students, etc. How are you accommodating those students? You mentioned you had an open house that you can't have right now. So what is your contingency?
Yeah, we have a number of measures in place. This fall, we formerly had a virtual tour. We launched a U-Visit virtual tour this fall, as well as a custom view book. So giving students the chance to create and recreate, depending on their interests, the information that they most want to know about Ohio Wesleyan in a moment's notice. We've also offered extensive one-on-one meetings with staff members, virtual, whether just as a phone call, FaceTime, Skype sessions. Staff members have experienced a lot of success in those ways. We have offered virtual information sessions twice a day during the week and once a day on Saturdays. So they can still visit with us as they would if they came to campus. If they want to jump on a campus tour virtually, they can still do that. It's just all taking place from the comfort of their living room or their bedroom at home. We have a chat function on our website, so students can scroll through a list of current students, faculty members, and staff members, maybe whose interests or academic areas are aligned with their own, and engage them in a chat. They're guaranteed an answer, if not immediately, within about a 24-hour time period. We launched a series of podcasts this year, and so we were going to release them one a week throughout the duration of the spring, but we released them all about a week ago so that families could have any of the information that's most relevant to them at their fingertips. Everything from choosing a major to academic advising to our orientation activities to college athletics, we have a couple of alums engaged in one of those. So lots of good information there as well. And next week we're launching a series that we're calling Bishop Plus, where we have at least twice a week, we have a live session with a faculty member or several faculty members. We have several sessions throughout the month with current students. We're planning a session with our president and a panel of current parents. We have a session that we call Sending Your Student to OWU, which we typically offer at our information session during a Saturday, that several administrators across campus talking about and answering the questions that parents typically pose to them about all things Ohio Wesleyan. So what we decided was not to try and recreate a virtual experience all day on a Saturday. Our students might come and spend from 10 to 4 with us. And we decided that we didn't know that students would spend that same time sitting at their computer and not being able to engage that way. So we've created many of the same types of sessions, but offering them in bite-sized chunks. And they have the live option. Everything I've just mentioned will also be recorded so that we have the opportunity to put that out there. We're also working with several faculty members on some COVID-19 related academic programming that might be made available to perspective and incoming students that's still in development, but certainly very relevant to where we are now, and trying to find all the different ways that students might want to be engaged. Our faculty have been terrific. They've really stepped up. I'm about to also extend the offer over 2 weeks later in April to allow students to attend classes virtually and to join in on those conversations. Faculty, in many cases, are very willing to do that. We have alumni right now, 60 or so across the country, who are calling students, emailing students, writing postcards to them, and also have stepped up their engagement as well. So I'm really grateful for the community, and really think that we have we're operating on multiple cylinders and really trying to think about all the different ways that we can engage students.
Well, in some ways, it seems like the situation is kind of forcing not just Ohio Wesleyan, but other schools and higher education perhaps in general to kind of rethink the paradigm a little bit. And we'll talk about that a little bit later in our conversation. But it also seems that I would venture that you're probably meeting students where they are now with
Yeah.
digital communication, et cetera, even more effectively than we would have been inclined to otherwise. So good for you. Now, is there any conversation on your campus about when you hope that you'll be able to open for visitors, guests?
Yeah, at this point in time, it's so hard to say. Just this morning we sent out a message to our staff saying that we, are sort of suspended indefinitely. We certainly hope to return around May 1st, but again, we of course have to follow the guidance of the CDC, the governor's office, and that will really dictate some of that. Certainly, when we can reopen for business and it is safe to welcome families back to campus, we will do so as soon as we possibly can. But we certainly want to be cognizant of the health and safety of our visitors, of our staff members. We don't want to create a situation in which anybody feels uncomfortable or unsafe. So we're certainly going to play that by ear.
So
We have programs planned for July that are typical summer programs that we will do in July and early August. Those are still on the books. That's certainly my hope is, at very least, if we could allow those to take place, that would be wonderful. But of course, we will. It's a wait and see game for everybody right now.
absolutely. And that's a good segue into where I'd like to go next. We talked about how the current situation affects the decision making of high school seniors and the way you engage them in kind of getting them to the final decision or choice of a college. But there are even more high school juniors on your doorstep right now, figuratively at least, who are eager to get started. They want to visit campus. They want to get to know the school. And traditionally, your staff probably would be looking at calendars for the fall and winter with college fairs and open houses and other kind of visits to high schools, et cetera. Now that all of that's kind of up in the air, as you begin to think about your contingencies for your outreach to the current juniors, what are you thinking about? Is much the same as you've discussed already? Or?
Yeah, I mean, certainly we've included juniors and even sophomores who are interested in jumping into anything that I've just mentioned. That's all open to any student. And again, in some ways, by allowing students to take advantage of what they're most interested in and the sessions or the topics that are most relevant to their interests at this point in time, it does allow for a sophomore or a junior to really, I think, take advantage of some of those opportunities. But you're right, everything this spring has been canceled. Of course, we have a university ban on travel like many institutions do. So even if things were happening, our staff is for the safety of our staff, we're not traveling as well right now. I don't know of a college fair that is still happening, but I do know of a number of virtual programs that individual institutions or organizations have made available. And so we are certainly keeping our eye out for those options. And for example, Ohio Wesleyan's a member of the Colleges That Change Lives, and just yesterday I got a survey about, would you be interested in doing a virtual event with this group, and ask some questions about what the structure should look like. Absolutely. Anything that any way that we can connect with younger students, which is what this event would certainly be flagging, we will look to do that. again, the question remains, when do we start planning for the fall? A lot by this time, schools usually start to open up visits, but I imagine, of course, K through 12, like the college and university, is playing the wait and see game as well, and many are also working and learning remotely. Counselors are so busy trying to manage how do they keep their communication levels up with seniors, with juniors, get them started effectively in this very different environment. I have a high school junior here in my home, who we were supposed to be on a college tour last week, which obviously didn't happen. And so we are talking even personally about the different ways that she can learn more about the schools that she's interested in, and how she might be impacted by what's happening around the country. So I'm experiencing it personally, and certainly feel for those counselors who are really working hard and closely with students to try and get them started on the right foot. I personally, and at Ohio Wesleyan, of course, we have made ourselves available to counselors. I have a communication actually set to go out today or tomorrow that will kind of highlight some of the things that I've shared with you about what we're doing, and also certainly indicate that we're happy to help in any way that we can.
Wow. Now, and you may hear this from your 17-year-old as well, but one of the conversations that I'm hearing quite often with rising seniors has to do with testing, because
Yeah.
they started with the PSAT in the fall of the junior year. Maybe they've already taken one SAT. They're not happy with the result. They want to kind of move one of the scores up, etc., or the ACT. And now the May testing canceled, and testing into the summer is very uncertain. Is Ohio Wesleyan looking at making any kind of accommodation for students who are not real happy with where they are in their own testing the pattern right now, and may
Yeah,
not have options?
we've been test optional for about 6 years. We are test optional for students who have at least a 3.0 GPA. I am exploring with the faculty committee that I work most closely with in my role, whether or not that should be extended to all students. Certainly we, apply a rigorous review in our process in general, but if we were to extend that further, then thinking specifically about how we can continue to do that. So that's been a part of our process. I'm frankly not as worried about that, because I think we have been for some number of years making good decisions, and looking to enroll the students who are most likely to be successful, certainly even without those test scores. So I think we'll continue to do that. What I currently wonder, perhaps even more so at the moment, is pass-fail. If schools have gone to pass-fail and we see a semester's worth of pass-fail grades for juniors, and they're applying early in their senior year without grades from that sixth semester, how will we make those decisions? And I don't have the answer yet, but I have thought a lot about, do we require quarter grades? Do we require semester grades? Do we make decisions a bit later in the process so that we ensure that we are seeing that most recent performance? Does that depend on the performance that we saw up to the end of the fifth semester? Those are the questions I'm asking myself. I would imagine my colleagues across the country are asking themselves similar questions. And I think, again, we'll need to wait and see. I know some high schools have talked about moving to that pass-fail strategy. Time will tell if that will be implemented.
On the test option, and I'm a real fan of test option. Earlier in my career, Franklin and Marshall, we went to test option. That was a real revelation for us. But I know that, and you probably see this too in conversation with kids and explaining, well, we are a test optional school. You can see that wariness in their eye that says, well, if I don't send my scores in, won't you just assume that they're low? Won't that hurt me anyhow? How do you respond to that?
I'll be honest, I don't know that I've ever been asked that question specifically. My prior institution was also a test optional institution and had been so since the mid 90s. So at least for, I would say the last 5 or 6 years of my career, that's been very much a reality. And I guess that I'm a little almost surprised by the question, because it isn't an assumption that I would ever make. I think that students, for all kinds of reasons, don't want to submit scores, can't submit test scores. There have been certainly other circumstances in students' lives that have led them to not submit scores. We certainly know that there are students for whom testing does not come as easy and natural to them as to others. And I think the data on many college campuses, including my own, certainly shows that perhaps test scores might show a student's ability to be successful in their first semester, but beyond that, it's their high school grades that truly are the best indication of success. And so with data like that, I think it's easy to perhaps respond to that question, to show that we have data that indicates that it isn't as critical to us, that we're really looking at how you engaged in the classroom over that 4-year experience, the study and good work habits that you built in that time period. That's certainly more effective than the one day or couple of days that they spent in a test taking situation.
Well, and that's a good explanation. I like what you're doing also with pairing the option with a minimum GPA qualifier there, because you do need to make sure that the student has achieved some success in the classroom in order to have a conversation about testing.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to kind of wrap things up with a sort of reflective conversation here about what's happening because of the coronavirus, what's happening to the search and selection processes for both students and for schools. It's clear that Ohio Wesleyan is making some accommodation moving forward into more work with technology and then digital communication. What do you think about the notion that we get to the end of the crisis, if you will? There's some thought that we may actually find that we've had to change the paradigm in a good way, the whole college going paradigm. It may not be easy to get from point A to point B, but the thought is that we may be kind of forcing ourselves into a consideration of a new way of doing things. So what are your thoughts? Are we likely to return to business as usual, or is there a reasonable chance that what emerges from this could be a different and perhaps even better approach to affecting the college going process?
I read an article that focused on an interview, or it may have been written by the president at Southern New Hampshire University in the last week. And he talked about how if we don't have the ability to welcome students, if colleges don't have the ability to welcome students back on campuses in the fall, that might be the end of higher education as we know it. And I think it makes a lot of sense. I also had the chance to sit in on a webinar last week with the president of the Ohio State University and a representative from the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, again, both talking about crises that they have dealt with in the past, research that they have done on how shifts are made, how institutions manage crises and think strategically about adapting to situations like this. And all of that has really made me think, we've talked for a long time about the business model being broken in higher education, and can we continue to sustain the experience in its current format across the country in the ways that we do. We've seen more institutions close. We've seen that they can't sustain the model currently. We've already seen in the last week a couple of institutions that have announced their intention to close as well, and this at least partially driven by the COVID-19 situation. So I do think we are going to face a new reality. I do think it does depend on whether or not fall is business as usual. If we can get back to what we have done in the past, I think that there's more of a likelihood of recovery. But will there be changes? Absolutely. We've had faculty members who have said, I enjoy this remote learning experience. I think I'm pretty good at it. And I've been able to engage my kids in my students in new and different ways. But on the flip side, I also think that there are, I hope that there are students who are also looking at this and saying, I miss being in the classroom. I miss being able to look somebody in the eye and engage in a debate with them in that way. I miss the face-to-face, the different level of interaction that you can have when you're sitting, across the table from someone and you're living down the hall from someone. So, I think it could also, in some ways, work to the benefit of the traditional residential liberal arts experience if students, miss not being in that environment. While I also have a high school junior in my home, I have a college freshman in my home who has returned from his campus. And, he's eager to go back, as he should be. He has great friends. He has terrific faculty members. He enjoys his classes. He's really involved on campus. He's the school mascot. So he can't do some of those things. And so, certainly I think that that's a reality too. So I think, will we be changed? Likely, yes. Exactly what that will look like, I think that really depends on what happens here in the next 4 or 5 months.
Which is just an open book right now.
It is, for sure.
We're going to wrap up here, but uh, when you, and I'm sure you're going to have opportunities to have this conversation with countless 17-year-olds, but given the opportunity to pull a young person aside, what advice would you give that person, your daughter, about proceeding with this process right now?
I would suggest to take advantage of all the resources that are out there. Colleges are eager and willing to connect. I think they've made it as accessible in many cases as possible. Um, that it is a good time to figure out what works for you in terms of how you can best obtain that information, whether it's a podcast, it's a virtual session, it's a one-on-one conversation. There's still a lot of good information out there. And no, while I don't think we can truly replace the campus visit experience itself, I think we can do a lot to help students and make the experience accessible for them. So I'd encourage them to take advantage of what's available to them now. And then when they can get back to campus, get back on a campus. I don't think that this should be the way in which students, hopefully this is not the way in which the majority of students will make their decisions. Hopefully they will still choose to visit campuses, still choose to engage with others when our campuses open back up again.
Wonderful. Your 17-year-old is very lucky to have that perspective at home with her right now. Hope she appreciates that.
Well, sometimes she does.
Well, Stephanie, I want to thank you very much for joining us today and sharing your insights into things that are happening in the college going process relative to Ohio Wesleyan. And again, your broader view, given your leadership role nationally, is very helpful here too. I want to give you one more opportunity to also provide for listeners any kind of website information that you would point them to learn more about how they can benefit from the Ohio Wesleyan experience.
Sure, absolutely. I think if you go to the Ohio Wesleyan website, go to the admission page, there's lots of information there on all the things that I've discussed. We've worked to make it very accessible. Actually, just had someone I've worked with at a marketing company reach out to me yesterday and tell me they've done a lot of research and looking at different websites and found ours to be really accessible. So it was nice to have that external validation. But we've worked hard to do that. So I think if, again, Ohio owu.edu/admission, that should certainly take students to a lot of information that can be helpful and relevant to them.
Excellent, excellent. Well, thank you again for taking time to chat with us today. Thanks also for your leadership at not only Ohio Wesleyan, but in college admission in general. I want to wish you the very best as you move forward with your planning. And to those who are listening, do take a look at the website that Stephanie has referenced. That's it for us at this point. I want to thank everyone for checking in on the Inside College Admission conversations. Be safe, and we'll look forward to another conversation later.